Okay, so it's 6 p.m. So welcome everyone. We want to start on time, and of course, there will be people joining in. So welcome everyone to this Open Innovation Workshop. We're very, very pleased to have you here. We have two channels that are active. Some people are connected via the Zoom video conference. And these people, of course, will have the benefit of being able to interact in real time and also pose questions to our speakers and to our panel. But we also have in parallel a YouTube channel with people listening through the stream and watching this event through the stream. And all in all, we have nearly 200 people registered for this workshop in a very, very short time. So that's an excellent turnout for the event. So let me share my screen so I can show you a few slides for introduction to the event. My name is Giovanni Emanuele Corazza. I'm a professor at the University of Bologna in the School of Engineering in Telecommunications. And I am also the president of the Fondazione Guglielmo Marconi. And this event is indeed a collaboration between different entities, Fondazione Marconi and University of Bologna, Alma Mater Studiorum, University of Bologna. Of course, there's a very strong tie between these two entities, and we are carrying out a program of collaboration on different initiatives, not only this kind of scientific workshops, but also events towards the expansion of creativity for the professors and the researchers inside the university, and the interaction with companies, both at national level and international level. We do this through the Marconi Institute for Creativity, which is a joint initiative of the Fondazione and the University of Bologna. You might see in the logo here of University of Bologna the year of foundation, 1088. So University of Bologna is indeed the oldest university in the world, or in the Western world, if you want. If you take into account Alexandria of Egypt, that, however, was not continuous since its foundation. But anyway, 1088, that was the starting date from University of Bologna. And I want to tell you that the first rector of the University of Bologna in 1088 was a student. So there were no professors back then. It was all self-organized learning by students. Also, we have the Marconi Society. I will tell you a little bit about this society later. But anyway, it's an American association, a charity right now, actually, that awards every year, sends out this Marconi Award for Telecommunications, which is the sort of Nobel Prize for Telecommunications and Information Technology. It's the equivalent to the Nobel Prize. And one of the speakers today is a Marconi Fellow. Of course, the city of Sasso Marconi, which is the location where Villa Grifone and the Fondazione Marconi is located, is also participating. The Bologna Business School, which is the business school of the university, which has pioneered several master courses on digital business intelligence, digital management, and also management of innovation. So there are several programs inside the BBS that are related to how we innovate for the future markets and how this relates to digital technologies. And finally, you see here the logo of the newly born ISSCI, which is an international society for the study of creativity and innovation. It's also an international entity based in France, and with members from all over the world, people working and researching in these areas of how the human mind can create ideas and how we can implement these ideas to become practical world innovations. So the program for today is simple in a sense and exciting at the same time. So I want to first of all start thanking the panel of speakers, excellent speakers that honor us with their presence tonight. We will start with Fabrizio Capobianco at 20 past the hour. And Fabrizio has been Of course, he's Italian born, but has been working in California for many, many years, where he started several companies. And one thing that was very specific of the approach of started companies for Fabrizio was that he was outsourcing some of the development of software, not to the usual, let's say, usual countries where you would think you would outsource software development, but also in Europe, and part of that was done in Italy. And I don't know if Fabrizio will talk about this later, but that was something that always struck me as very, very interesting. Fabrizio will be followed by Michele Poggipolini. He is the CEO of the Poggipolini industry that is working in the sector of, well, first of all, car and car racing, so providing parts to Ferrari and other racing teams, but also in aeronautics and space industry. And specifically, he has been starting up now companies for interconnection of smart parts inside engines and through wireless sensor networks. So he will talk about open innovation in manufacturing, and he is also the president of the young section of the Confindustria Emilia, which is, of course, the Association of Industries here in the region, in the Emilia-Romagna region. And at 7, we will be joined by Vint Cerf. Vint Cerf, well, first of all, he's one of the fathers of the internet because he was the author of the TCP protocol, so the transmission control protocol that we all use through the internet, except for the streaming part. So those of you who are listening through YouTube are receiving their packets through another protocol, which is the UDP. But everyone else that is on a two-way communication, like the video conference is actually using this TCP protocol. And the author of this protocol is Vint Cerf. And of course, he's done many other things. He works for Google, but he is also the chairman of the board of the Marconi Society that I told you about. So he will be speaking in this event also in that forum. Let me mute my telephone, otherwise you keep hearing the beeps of my chat. I'm receiving messages from people here. Okay, so let me start the work by reminding us that 2020 will be remembered for bad things, for the coronavirus and the sanitary emergency for the pandemic. But also it's an important year for some anniversaries. So first of all, 100 years ago, on June 15 in 1920, the first radio broadcasting transmission was occurring from Chelmsford, which was the location of the Marconi company. And since, well, I say up to that date, all that was actually active was wireless telegraphy. So this was the real start of radio. And I have to say that this operatic concert, which was sang by the Australian soprano Nellie Melba in 1920, was sent out to all of the world because Marconi was able to put a net around the world through transmission in the ionospheric, so low frequencies with ionospheric reflection. And it was attended by an audience of 500 to 600 people, which is a little larger than we have tonight, but similar in a sense. So that was happening 100 years ago. And you can see that Guglielmo Marconi was also not only an inventor, but also entrepreneur with a sense of branding and marketing. And you can see here the logos and the ways he was selling the apparatus for radio reception. But if we go back 125 years more, so 125 years ago, 1895, that is the start of wireless communications across obstacles, so not in non-line of sight. And these are the years of the first experiments of Guglielmo Marconi at Villa Grifone. And you see here in this picture that I took in November 2019, before the coronavirus hit us. the Celestines Hill. So the first obstacle that was actually overcome by the transmission of this apparatus here. This was a transmitter. And on the other side of this hill, of course, we had the famous farmer that received the signal and shot the gun to tell Marconi that the transmission was successful. After that, of course, it was all a race against conquering longer and longer distances, first on ground, then across the channel between France and England, and then across the sea in order to monitor the situation for ships, and then across the Atlantic, 1901, the great adventure of crossing the Atlantic with radio waves, something that everyone said it was impossible. But Marconi believed in this intuition. Of course, he had no mathematical proof that this was indeed possible, but it did it. And of course, he had to fight against skepticism around the world. But in the end, opening up commercial service, of course, he was able to convince the world that this was indeed possible. And by the way, I have to say that on the transatlantic ships that were equipped with Marconi's telegraph, wireless telegraph, Marconi was not selling the equipment. He was not selling the people operating the equipment. He was selling the service. So Marconi in 1900 started the business model of the platform as a service. I told you a little bit about the Marconi Society, which was an idea of Gioia Marconi, as daughter of Guglielmo from the first marriage. And I told you that every year the Marconi Society awards this prize, which is the equivalent of the Nobel Prize for telecommunications. I have a small subset of the awardees, just to tell you that Sir Kao was the inventor of the optical fiber. Leonard Kleinrock was one of the fathers of the internet. Federico Faggin, inventor of the microprocessor. Vint Cerf, I already told you about. Tim Berners-Lee, the inventor of the World Wide Web. Page and Brin, the founders of Google. Jacobs, the founder of Qualcomm. Martin Cooper, who inside Motorola designed and realized the first cell phone. And Brad Parkinson, one of the fathers of the GPS. So all of these big names and people that made a difference in the history of the information society are all part of what we call the Marconi legacy. And so what happened after Guglielmo Marconi. Now let's come to our days. Of course, something happened this year, the start of this year, maybe a few months before that in China, that was not foreseen. Although many entities had made studies and simulations about what would happen in case of a pandemic, but these studies and simulations remained on paper, and the actual political, medical, and economical worlds were not ready for what happened and what is still happening, of course, today. And we are, of course, striving to go back to a normality, but we talk about a new normal to say that the world for certain will not return to the previous state, to what we were before the pandemic hit us, which has a very important consequence, which is part of the reason why we are having this workshop tonight. If the world will be in some way new and will not return to what it was before the pandemic, this means that experience is certainly important, but not sufficient anymore in order to navigate the new world. Because the uncertainty that we are facing means that new solutions, new practices, new products, new services, new markets will have to be pursued, will have to be implemented. It's not something that might happen, it's something that is certain. So we always live in a world in which we have a single reality in actuality, but the future is always a cone that opens up into all possible futures, some of which are plausible depending on the state of the knowledge that we have today. We call these plausible futures. Some of them, which is this light blue cone at the center, are more probable depending on the trends that we see today. And if nothing changes, we have just the business as usual. Now, in times in which we have no black swans like the COVID-19 was, you can plan your business and also the innovation based on business as usual and the trends that will lead into the probable futures. But when things happen that are not forecast, they're out of our foresight exercises, then we must be ready for different futures that belong to an area which is much larger. So the most sensible approach when we are facing uncertainty is actually to try to design preferable futures, which would be represented by this green cone, and then work back from these preferable futures to the present to see what are the steps that must be taken in order to reach that preferable future. Now, in this preferable future that we might foresee 10 years from today or 20 years from today, you need to work in the medium long term in order for this exercise to be really powerful. One of the elements that we understood, one of the elements that will be important, is the fact that products, services, and markets will evolve at a pace and with a potential differentiation, which will be so large that no single company will always have all the competences that are necessary for that evolution. Or in other words, we need to innovate in ecosystems. We cannot innovate in single companies, but we need to cooperate in a very dynamic fashion, forming networks of companies that might change depending on the time, the space, the culture, the product, and the situation. But for sure, networking between different companies and also new geographical configurations after this pandemic will have to be put in place, because we understood that a purely global economy might not always work when we are forced to lock down certain parts of the world. So this is when probably open innovation comes of age. It's a concept which is not new. The fact that you can innovate not within the boundaries and the walls of a single company, not protecting every little bit of the innovation process, but opening up this process to larger communities, to ecosystems. So this idea, as I said, is not new, but now it's probably the time in which it comes of age. Because of necessity, because of the uncertainty, because of the new way the world is today. So we believe that this is in some way true, and it also depends on the ability of the human mind to generate ideas which are both original and effective. This is the reason why we founded this Marconi Institute for Creativity, which, as I told you, is a collaboration between Fondazione Marconi and the University of Bologna. And the last thing I'm going to say to close this introduction is that, of course, we are here today connected through the internet. So thanks to Vint and everyone else that worked on the development of the internet. But sooner or later, we will be able to travel again and to go physically into places. So I want to invite you all to visit Villa Grifone, the home of Guglielmo Marconi, where we have a museum and where you can breathe actually the atmosphere of a place where invention took place. So thank you very much for listening to me in this introduction. Now it's 18:19, so we are on time for the first talk. And let me introduce again Fabrizio Capobianco. He's the Chief Innovation Officer at Minerva Networks in the Silicon Valley. So I will stop sharing my screen, and I will give the floor now to Fabrizio.
Thanks, Giovanni. Hope everybody can see me and hear me. Well, the main reason why I've been invited to this presentation, I guess, is because I live in Silicon Valley. So there's really nothing interesting that I've done. But since I've been living in Silicon Valley for the last 20 years, 21 actually, I have some history, and I can tell you a little bit more maybe than people that live in Italy on how people here in the Valley do innovation. And I'm pretty sure that Vint, after me, can tell you a lot more about how Silicon Valley works. I'll give you my perspective as an Italian immigrant in the Valley, and maybe I can give you some color on how different the culture is in the Valley compared to what I found in Italy. Of course, I would love to be back in Bologna. I've been invited from the business school a long time ago to give a speech, and I only remember the food, and that alone would be a good reason to come back if I could. One day I'll be able to be back. It's been a long time because of COVID now, and it's pretty painful for us immigrants to be far away. Now, my story is I'm an engineer. I grew up in Italy, studied in Pavia at the Almo Collegio Borromeo. The University of Pavia is a little bit older. A little bit younger than the Bologna one, but they're close enough. And I have a PhD in computer science. Started a couple of companies in Italy around iTech. And then first the internet company actually called Internet Graffiti a long time ago. And then I decided to move to Silicon Valley because the two companies I had were really good. I felt like I was playing in the Serie A league, but I really wanted to play in Champions League. So I went to Silicon Valley, worked here for a bit for a company, and then started my own company called Funambule in I think in 2002. And one thing that I found interesting, I was here also at the HP Labs in '95. So it's been Silicon Valley has been my life. It's more than half of my adult life here. Is the culture. I mean, the idea of open innovation comes from the culture, and it really starts from that concept that everyone that comes to the Valley is doing that exactly as the people that were coming here for, looking for gold in the far west. And if you were alone, you had everyone around you that was trying to get here was a competitor, because had they been there before you, they would have found gold before you. But on the other side, the road was pretty tough. So you needed someone to help you out. So you can't go around and help people around you in what we call competition, which is competition, but we kind of work together, because at the end of the day, we have the same goal, which is to get there. And then, the best wins, and someone will get the gold. So that culture of kind of opening to people and helping people is something that you find as soon as you land here and you send an email to someone or a LinkedIn and they answer. And I was able to come here and talk to CEOs of companies that would not have answered any email to me in Europe. And then I started working. At this point, I am the chief innovation officer of a company called Minerva, because my last company, Talk TV, was acquired by Minerva. And it's another piece of the puzzle. The first piece is culture is the key. It starts with Fairchild Semiconductors, the way Silicon Valley came around, being the American frontier and anything. But then, the question is, how do you do open innovation? And that's where it changes. So on one side, you have innovation. You just, try to do new things. The other thing is how do you make it open? So open innovation means, work with other people, not just working inside a company. And how the Valley became the place where this happens. And it sounds strange because, you hear about Apple most of the time, and they don't let you get into that building. There's no openness there. It's as close as possible. They'll shoot you if you get close. And on the other side, you start looking at what Facebook does and Google does, and all of a sudden they have participating in open source projects They have collaborated, even if there are enemies. They actually work together and move stuff together, and that in accelerated greatly, I think, in the last 10, 15 years since I've been here. There are a few things that are here that, part is the culture. Okay, we don't, we want to help others. We want to give back. We want to help anyone comes in the Valley. I was like you 20 years ago. I came here, didn't know anybody. You're coming in, you're asking for help. I'll help you. The second thing is legally, there is no competition clause. And that's one thing that people don't keep in mind enough. You cannot have anyone in your company sign a no competition clause. And that's a little rule that changes everything. People move from one company to the other one, and they take all their knowledge to the other company, and you cannot have them sign that they can't compete. So innovation moves because people move. At the end of the day, innovation is a game of talents. It's the idea there's come from people, and that's the key. So the fact that you can take your knowledge, innovation, and move to your competitor, and no one can say anything, and then you keep working there, is one of the reasons why this thing keeps moving so fast. People in the Valley don't tend not to work for the same company for 20 years. It's a fact. You work for a company for 3 years. In your resume, if you work for a company for less than a year, people will look at it and say, okay, there's something wrong with this person. Particularly if you do a couple of times, stay in a company more than a year, that's bad. But if you've been with the same company for more than 3 years, unless it's the company you founded, there's something wrong with you. So, and it's known everywhere. It means that you don't want to try new things. You don't want to innovate. You don't want to move forward. And so they're going to look at your resume. And if you're stale in the same company for 5, 6 years, this is not a person that wants to change the world. Then it's someone who sits. And therefore, everyone here gets into a company, learns as much as he can, gets out, and then, oops, sorry, Vint. I think you're an exception to the thing. I actually am working in Funambule. I'm the chairman of Funambule. I started in 2002, so I'm celebrating 18, almost 19 years as the chairman. So I can relate to that. But I'm not 18 anymore. So if you're 18, 19, 20, I think that's a different story. So that's one element is that people move around, ideas move around, and in compared to Europe, where we're seeing people stay in the same company for 20 years, it's circulation of ideas and talents, and also how you get new talent there is a fight. The other part that I think is key is that companies in the Valley realize that sometimes innovation doesn't come from inside. And that's sort of the idea of open innovation. You can go out and collaborate like Google and Facebook do, or Microsoft and others on open source, but you can buy innovation. And that is another element, that the story that we don't have in many parts of Italy, for example, that I know well. I started a company here because I got acquired here. I could not sell Talk TV in Europe. It would have been very hard, and I ended up selling in Silicon Valley because this is the place where you get money, you grow your company, and then you exit, you sell. And the environment here is meant for people to just build an innovation. And yes, if you can go IPO and blah blah blah, 1 out of a million, you can get to the other point. If you get to a certain point and you realize that your investor realize, we're not going to get to IPO, we can make money now. The time is right, you sell. And all of a sudden, Talk TV becomes part of Minerva. Minerva is a company that's been around for 20 years. It's the leader in TV platform for operators. And, I don't think the CEO will be happy to hear that, but it was kind of stale. And kind of, you sell to the operators. All of a sudden, you buy a company like Talk TV that does sports, and is building a watch together platform for people to talk, and has Real Madrid, Juventus, Barcelona, and then moves into music. All of a sudden, we're doing virtual concert in Italy with Alive. We did one in September at the Arena in Verona, and it's a completely new thing for Minerva. Minerva was selling to mobile operators, TV provider, kind of boring thingy. All of a sudden, we did the smart highlights for soccer. We just did the highlights of the presidential debate. We're doing concerts. So it kind of brings in a new energy, if you want, in new innovation. And clearly it's I'm talking about this because I'm doing it, so that I have to say that it's cool, but it is a little bit new for them, and they didn't have it inside, and now we have a team that is focused only on innovation. So these are, in my opinion, there are the kind of thing that there are the underlying on the technology side. I think the major change that I see in the Valley is being open source. I've been lucky enough that I started working on open source in the late 80s. As strange as it sounds to anyone who's American, a lot of open source stuff is done actually in Italy. I mean, Arduino is an Italian company. The guy that I was working at the lab in Pavia, Alessandro Rubini, is the person who wrote the device drivers for Linux. So when the mouse started moving on a Linux box, that was because in my lab someone was working on it, and I started working in it. And open source sounded kind of crazy from an IP standpoint, intellectual property. It's not there. I mean, it's not something the way you do innovation in a company in the past is that you own your own stuff and then you have your own products all closed. All of a sudden, it seems that the best product were open when a lot of people come in and working together. And I remember when I came to the Valley, and that was 2000, 2001, 2002, I started looking at open source as a disruptive force in the market. And I started thinking, okay, maybe IP is not that important. Maybe patents are not that important. At least in software, we could build something that is completely open and make a business around it. And so that's where things started clicking. And me and a group of other people started working on a concept of commercial open source. Commercial open source, when we came out, I remember the Free Software Foundation wanted to kill us because the idea of putting together open source and making money, it was just not possible, and it was not accepted. But the CEO of MySQL, who's a friend, was there, and they managed to get a company build on open source to $1 billion. And all of a sudden, all the investors, I had the mobile open source platform because I was building the open source platform for mobile, and all of a sudden, I got $5 million of investment from the first VCs, and it kind of changed the dynamic of the way you do software. Tends to be better if you collaborate, if you work in open source. If you have engineers dispersed, you don't need to have everyone here in the Valley. It's hard to find talent here. People will not come to work for you. They're building their own company. They go work for Google. And then if you are, the starts, you get the mediocre people. So the way I started Funambl was American money, capital, and people in Italy. So maybe outsourcing is not the right, offshoring is not the right thing, is get people dispersed. Your talent is everywhere. There is no need to have people in one place. And if you spread out people, then controlling IP becomes harder. And so open source seems to be the right way. And that's how we did Funambl. The Talk TV was a liquid company, meaning that we never had an office. And that started in 2012. And I kept going on for the last 8 years. I remember going to Chernobyl. There is a conference there every year, and to speak about working from home, working from, the ability of not having an office. And I remember it was probably 4 years ago, and they were looking at me like I was coming from Mars. And all of a sudden now I'm thinking about everyone who was there looking at me. Now they're started working from home, and they've all realized in the last 6 months that that's possible. So that started as well in Silicon Valley. Innovation is just not, code. I'm an engineer. I write code every day still. It's not just writing code. It is also innovation in processes. The idea that you can create a company like Talk TV, which is a liquid enterprise. There is no office anywhere. Everyone is working from anywhere in the world. We had majority in Italy, but 1 in Sardinia, 1 in Sicily, 3 in Rome, 4 in Milan. We had people in China, people in London, people in Silicon Valley, in the Midwest. It's a huge innovation that actually changes everything for people that are not in Silicon Valley, because all of a sudden being in Silicon Valley is not that important, and the quality of the air is not great lately. So there is a good reason to move somewhere else. But I think the other part of Silicon Valley that's interesting is not just how do we work together, how do we move talent around, how we talk to people, how we develop a commercial business around open source. is also how we innovated in the model, in the business model, the corporate model. And at the end of the day, you find ways where this works. I mean, the reason why Facebook is doing open source is not because they love open source or Google, is that the money is in data. So if you have data, then you have everything you need. And so the technology that is above the data is not as important. Your IP is the data, are the users. So open source everything, collaborate, and then you are the one who has more data, and then you win anyway. So there is never underlying. There's yes, you help people, blah blah blah, but the underlying there is a business reason why open innovation works better, and why the Valley goes into that direction. It's always been like that, and it will always be like that. But that's sort of my story around open innovation in Silicon Valley with my limited view. I apologize if I says to things that were wrong. I hope Vint will clarify things that I say they weren't true.
Okay, thank you very much, Fabrizio. This was very interesting, and it's impossible to be wrong because this is your experience, and that's the story that you told us is very, very interesting. And so we have a few minutes before the time slot for Michele starts. So I will take advantage of that to start asking you a couple of questions. First of all, you've been talking about this fascinating story of the Silicon Valley. We know there are other parts in the world where activity has, in a similar way, but not identical, of course, is starting to grow and flourish. Do you see it possible that this model is translated in other parts of the world, let's say Israel, for example, or Far East countries? Is that possible? Is that desirable?
Exactly. So the question is it desirable? I mean, at the end of the day, this is the place where everything is here. So if you want to start a tech company, you have the money to start, you have the other companies that can help you grow, and you have the exits. And those are three separate elements that you find in this place. So I usually use it came from a friend, the tomato paradigm. And if you have to start a tech company, you can decide to put it in Silicon Valley, or you can put it in Italy. And if you want to grow tomato, you can decide whether you want to put it in Naples or you want to put it in Norway. The probability of the tomatoes to grow better in Naples are higher. It's not that you can't do it in Norway, but the weather is better, the soil is better, the sun is there, and there are all the elements that make your tomato grow faster, which is one important thing, and bigger and better in Naples than it is in Norway. So if you want to start a company today, still Silicon Valley is the place to be, not because there is talent, because I think the talent should be somewhere else, and I've done it. It's just that you have all the elements here. You have the VCs that have done it before, big time, billion-dollar companies, they're all built here. You have 10 minutes from me, there is Google, Facebook, Apple. I can find anyone that I need in 10 minutes, which is important. And the exits are here. You don't need, I think, the people to be here. So replicating Silicon Valley, I think it's very hard, if not impossible, because they're all the elements. But I think Israel has done a phenomenal job in doing that. First, they started a company here with engineers in Israel. They do 1 exit, 2 exit, 3 exit. People start making money. VCs here start going there, and all of a sudden you have a similar market there, and it's happening everywhere. I think with this pandemic, this is only going to accelerate. So far, money is also moving because the VC market in Europe is quite active now, and it wasn't active when I left Italy 20 years ago. So I think the answer is yes, but I still think Silicon Valley is going to lead for a long time because the big guys are here in every sort of from the money at the beginning to the middle to the end. The end is very important. Start a company in Italy and try to sell it to another Italian company. There is no one who could buy you, so it's hard.
Okay, thank you very much. I hope you can stay until the end, so we will have more questions for you later.
Sure, I will.
Okay, so now we can move on to Michele, and when we go to Michele Poggipolini, the story changes. It's a dual in a sense, dual scenario, dual environment, because now we're talking not about silicon, but motors, the Motor Valley, because the Motor Valley is here in Bologna and Modena. So this is the place to be if you want to participate in this race of building cars, fast cars, and luxury cars. And the Poggipolini industry, and that Michele is leading now, has a story which is very, very interesting. Also affected by changes in rules in Formula One races that force them to change their business model in a sense. I'm sure Michele is going to touch upon this. But anyway, even though the market for engine and engine parts is very, very different from that of software and the open source environment that Fabrizio told us about, still Michele is thinking about open innovation. So I will give you the floor, Michele, to tell us what it means to do open innovations in Italy in the Motor Valley.
Thank you very much, Giovanni. Hello, everyone. Thanks first of all for the invitation. It's a big pleasure to be for me here. Yes, I will start first of all to give you, let's say, a picture of what Poggipolini is doing today. The company was founded in Bologna in 1950 by my grandfather, so I'm the third generation. Today I'm the CEO. And in 1970, we started to work with titanium. So it's a very exotic, very exclusive and high performance material. And the titanium fasteners, because Poggipolini is leader in fasteners, in bolts, were used to reduce the weight of racing motorcycles. My father was a racer, he was a professional racer, so he needed to win more races, and reducing the weight was one of the factor. Then he was capable to take the company into Formula One, and from 1980 up to 2009, 90% of the business was Formula One. So today, 2020, 70% of the business is aerospace, 20% is a street car, so automotive, and only 10% is Formula One. So what happened during the last 10 years? We were mainly working for a sport, for Ferrari, of course, on engines, but Formula One is a sport, so the rules changed, and we lost 65% of the business in 3 months because the rules changed. We were supplying back then engineering, designing, manufacturing fasteners, and also precision parts for the engine mainly. And before there were no rules, no, let's say, unlimited use of the engine. Up to 500 they were capable to produce every year. And then with the new rules, we went down to 80. So it was a big drop. So I joined the company 100% of my time back then in 2010, and we really started to think out of the box with an approach that we can call today open innovation, but in the beginning was open mindset, and it was based on reinvesting everything and bringing our know-how and technology to new markets. So technology transfer from Formula One to automotive and the aerospace. Different markets, of course, big difference between automotive and aerospace, but we also decided to become the leader of titanium fasteners and bolts for the automotive sector. In the car sector, no titanium were used. Still today, only the hypercars are using titanium. Only the very expensive cars like €1 million car are capable to use titanium. And back then it was almost, let's say, not usual for them to use titanium because it was very not known as a material compared to steel or aluminum. But we were capable to, let's say, introduce this technology because of our expertise in Formula One. And then we were capable to reduce, let's say, the gap we lost because of the Formula One growing into the automotive side, but also into the helicopter side as well in aerospace, because in helicopters, you need very critical and very vital components, fastener mainly, and most of them are only supplied by the huge multi-billion giants that we have now in the industry. So we were capable to really offer our product, offering a great service in terms of engineering, manufacturing on a custom side. Formula One, it's small volume, a lot of components, but small volume. This is quite similar to, and very demanding, so very demanding in terms of technology. And it is quite similar to aerospace, helicopter side and space, but also hypercars. In 2014, 2015, we understood that in order to scale up, we needed to designed to develop a brand new manufacturing process to take titanium fasteners to premium cars. So the idea was, let's go down from the 1 million euro car to the 100,000 euro car. So let's help our premium customers, like, of course, here we are in the Motor Valley, so we have Ferrari, we have Lamborghini, Maserati, Pagani, but also thinking about overseas. So, for example, the VW Group with Porsche. Porsche is a top premium brand, which is producing, let's say, about 200,000 cars per year compared to the 10,000 cars per year of Ferrari, as an example. Then we started to think how we could reduce the cost of the titanium bolt. Because of course we are paying a big premium against steel in terms of raw material, but the process itself is very complex. It's all hot forging and so on. So it's quite totally different than the steel, the cold forming market. So in order to work on a brand new process, we started to deal with and selecting the suppliers with an open mindset. So suppliers that were doing since many years, probably 50 years, machine equipments, let's say, without not the innovation we were asking. And once we selected together with university and also some, let's say, startups that were dedicated on the research on specific, let's say, components and also coatings, for example, to process the wire, to process the raw material, we were capable to develop something that is really disrupting the manufacturing process of titanium fasteners. Titanium, let's say, also hot forged material that needs to be hot forged. And that was very tricky because we were starting from, let's say, an idea that started from myself, from my father as well, which is the president, and our top engineering team. But we realized that alone we were not able to make it. And so we needed to create an ecosystem of suppliers from the raw material side to the machine equipments to software, also to control, let's say, the industrialization during the process of the components. And that was the winning factor. To give you an idea, we are capable today because the process was installed. Let's say, it was placed in the new factory we have here in Bologna in November 2019. So it's very recent. And we are capable to go from 1 bolt per minute to 100 bolts per minute. So this is opening the opportunity for premium OEM customers to use titanium to reduce the weight of a car. To give you an idea, for example, for a Porsche, a new electric car like the Taycan, or even a Tesla, if you take a Tesla, with our fasteners, we can reduce down to 20 kilograms. So 20 kilograms is a lot of saving, and that it's very important, especially for the range, to extend the range of the battery, but also for the emissions, also for hybrid cars, not only full electric, but also for a combustion engine car. Then this process, now it's also part of, let's say, another big step that we are taking into the company, because we are entering now the commercial aircraft industry. So working, for example, with Boeing, and working with the tier ones of Boeing. In Italy, we have Leonardo, which is supplying structures, for example, for the Boeing 787. So what we are also, how we are positioning ourselves as a new and also outsider supplier for this very, how can I say, big, super big market, but it's only populated by a couple of multi-billion companies that, of course, today are impacted heavily by the COVID. So the process, if we take a comparison between the aerospace and the automotive market, in the automotive titanium use, it's 0%, okay, only hypercar. In the aerospace market, 50% of the fasteners are made out of titanium. So we are talking about 5 billion bolts to be manufactured every year. So it's a huge market. And this is controlled by 3 big players. 2 are Americans and 1 is European. It's a French company. Of course, like Fabrizio was saying, we cannot be a competitor of such big groups, but we have sometimes also to try to cooperate with these groups. And this is also something that happened in the recent, let's say, months, because we realized that when you build an aircraft, Of course, today the chipset are lower than before COVID, but when you build an aircraft, you are building, for example, A320, you need at least 1 million fasteners, and half of them are made out of titanium, but there is a so large fragmentation of, let's say, components that even for the giant company, it's tough to supply the whole package, because we have some volumes that for them it's very small and very specialized. So that is the new niche that, thanks to this program, that thanks to this process, we are tackling. And this it's also not only changing the internal and compared to the old style manufacturing old style Poggio-Pollini process, but also when we compare our 100 bolts per minute process that we call the high-speed hot forging process to the standard process used by the aerospace suppliers, we are cutting 50% the operations. It's all automatic line. The impact of the Bologna ecosystem also helped us because, you know, Bologna is also capital of packaging and automation. So also collaborating with some of the large groups, we were capable to develop this new way of producing fasteners, thinking to have one machine, one line. So we start from the raw material and we end with the packaging, and we can do in each line a huge number of part numbers. So it's not one machine, one part number, because I need the millions of parts. One machine, a lot of part numbers. So what the customer really needs. And I believe that this is very important for us, especially during those times. Because we are mainly working, today we are working with all the automotive OEMs, top premium brands, and also with aerospace, we said Leonardo, Safran, Boeing, and so on. We always work with the engineering team. So our company was always focused on finding new solutions, finding new ideas, trying to understand the needs of our customer. And we were always capable for more than 30 years to be in touch with the newest materials, newest coating, newest processes. So we always tend to try to support our customer and to find the added value, okay? Offering them the flexibility that an SME can offer compared to a much larger group. So because of the bolts that we supply are vital, they are defined vital, because if we have a failure, for example, in the rotor of an helicopter, of course, this is something catastrophic. 4 years ago, we started to think how we can reimagine fasteners. And then the idea was to, let's say, working on this new technology that is capable let's say, to extract data from the fastener. So we developed specific sensing elements that we patent, and those sensing elements are specific to fasteners application, and they are embedded inside the fastener. So the fastener becomes a real IoT device, we can say. The bolt is connected. It's at the moment the bolts are all cabled, are all wired, and they can give us information that the engineers of our customers, what they didn't know before. Because there is always the idea that the fastener, even if it's a critical fastener, is a sort of commodity, okay? So we are focused on the system, we are focused on the vehicle, then we are focused on the system, and then we are not very much expert on that application, on that bolt. In fact, over-design on fasteners is absolutely usual. So thanks to this technology 4 years ago, and also working together with a customer that understood that this technology could make, let's say, could be very, very, let's say, interesting, we started a pilot project, and we were capable to say that the bolts they were using in that application, they were 3 times over-designed. So if you are in automotive, you can take, for example, a 12mm fastener in steel, then you can replace the 12mm fastener in steel in titanium, and then you have a reduction, so 1-to-1 reduction of 45%. But if you are capable to redesign, because you know exactly the performance that the fastener needs to attend, you can go down to 70%, because you don't need the 12mm, you can go down to 10mm, for example, with titanium. And this was the first project where we were capable to demonstrate to the customer that what our engineers were simulating was fine. So we decided this year to spin off these technologies, this project, into a startup, into an innovative startup. And the mission of the startup that we called Sensyn today is focused on working on the data, so analyzing all the data and offering a new kind of servitization based on data that we are capable to extract from the fasteners to our customers. And also this is opening new opportunities, a lot of new opportunities, because for example, today we are working in construction. If you think about fasteners on the bridges and how tough sometimes is to control and to check the torque and to control the health of the fasteners in those very critical applications, Sensyn could help this this kind of monitor and this kind of application. So it's always I say, when you are in a company that you are doing a lot of R&D, because you are a mechanical company, you're working on a process, you're working on a product. I think that sometimes if you are doing and if you are developing something that is very, let's say, of research, which is different than development, if that research will need some specific investment, some specific competence that are not part of your own soul, your own heritage, creating a startup, a spin-off starting from this approach could be the right choice. And this is what I think will offer us the opportunity to accelerate with this new value proposition with the customer, thinking also long-term, because probably in the future, like in 10 years, probably 100 volts that we supply to a critical system, for example, in the aerospace, 80% will still be hardware. So it will be exactly the same volts that we are doing today, but probably 20% of the volts could be Sensyn. So basing also our business model into the data. So this is something that is new approach from us. That's why the partner we choose is a partner that is expert on digitalization and digital platform and services. So it's not only a private equity, but it's also an expert in this field, and working in an ecosystem environment, because more also other technologies that we are going to apply into this product is coming from other startups that are part of our ecosystem, will also give us the opportunity to accelerate. So the acceleration is very important. And when we were back 5-6 years ago, when we needed to develop the new process, we needed also to be very fast. And that's why thinking outside from your walls and going into the market, traveling, try to talk to the people, talk to your potential new suppliers, and understanding also your competition now is doing things, that is also very important, because sometimes we lose that kind of, because we are, always in the day-by-day situation, we lose that kind of approach, which is very, very, very key. So in those days, especially, like you said, Giovanni, during the presentation, I believe open innovation is absolutely fundamental for our industries, for our entrepreneurs here. Is a cultural issue, of course, that we have to try to demonstrate that without the open innovation, it will be more tough to overcome this new normal that we are, all of us are, let's say, are approaching. But we don't have choices. So it's key. It's important also to, let's say, think how I can transfer my current productions, my current technology to other markets, because we have a lot of opportunity probably in 5 minutes, but you never talk to that company because you probably thought that your application cannot be of their interest. And most of the times you can find that you are not right. So this is absolutely important for the present, let's say, not only for the future.
Okay, thank you very much, Michele. And I think your presentation makes it very clear that the present we're living and the future in front of us is a new economy in which companies from different sectors start to talk together with almost the same vocabulary. So you come from the mechanical sector and the racing car sector, but now you're talking about Internet of Things and actually IOF, which is the Internet of Fasteners.
Yes.
You are starting the IOF and data. So data is also for you part of your future business model. And just very quickly, I would like to ask you, the fact that you're putting intelligence into bolts and fasteners gives you really an edge in terms of distributing sensors in places where they are critical. So that is actually the best place where you need a sensor in order, for example, to measure the reliability and the state of an engine. Do you want to comment on that?
Yes, that is absolutely right. When you have a system, you have a standard commodity fasteners, but very critical fasteners. So if you are capable to create a net between all those critical fasteners, and you really know exactly which kind of data, which kind of, for example, temperatures, heat flux, self-loosening, or clothes you are interested to follow, because then thanks to AI, you can give back an output that can support the monitoring, or, for example, the autonomous let's say, fixing of some behavior of your system. It is absolutely important, especially when you think about heavy infrastructures. I mean, also in the oil and gas, and in the bridges as well. Sometimes it's also very expensive, is risky sometimes to take maintenance. If you look also to the rail, you have some critical fasteners that always, and most of the time manually, they're controlled and checked. So taking this into remote controlling could help a lot, could have also a very important impact to the society, having an extra and more precise controlling of critical applications. So that is absolutely key.
Okay, thank you. Thank you very much. That's very interesting. We might return to that. And I want to again ask all the audience, both on the two channels that we have, to put down questions for our speakers that I will relay to them in the Q&A session. Now it's time for Vint Cerf to take the floor, and everything that we've been talking about as an origin and the story of the internet, of course, is very, very important. And Vint was at the center of that, starting with the DARPA projects, I guess, and all the way to right now, the situation that we have right now, in which the internet is what it is. And we have had a symposium when we had the last Marconi celebration in Italy about where the internet is going and what are the ups and downs and the security threats that we have right now. So, Vint, what is your opinion about open innovation? Is this a dream that can be realized in its full-fledged flavor? Or should we also be concerned about preserving data and property, intellectual property, and security threats and so on? Vint, you have the floor, please.
Well, thank you very much for inviting me to join you. I'm glad I could come a little early so I could listen to what Michela and Fabrizio had to say. They just demonstrated that innovation is not dead, that there is plenty of room for it, and it isn't confined only to Silicon Valley, although I must say Silicon Valley provides a pretty potent mix of available resources that enables people to innovate. But we see centers of innovation in other places around the US. And one thing I would observe, interestingly, is that a number of people who have emigrated to the US have found success partly because of the available resources and the willingness to take risk, which we don't necessarily always find in other parts of the world, Europe included. I wanted to make a couple of observations about what I heard, and then I'd like to spend a little bit of time on open innovation. One thing very clear from both what Michela and Fabrizio said is that something I will quote from Jim Clifton, who is the chairman and CEO of Gallup Corporation. He says very potently that the purpose of a business or a company is to create and keep a customer. And it not to improve shareholder value, not to do some of those other, financial things, but to, create and keep a customer. And I think you heard from both Fabrizio and Michela, and most likely from other people who will be talking today, that that is a vital part of a successful business. What I would like to spend some time on with regard to open innovation is starting out with one of the most critical elements of this open innovation is specifically openness, which has been emphasized more than once. But I want to give a concrete example of how openness creates new opportunity. I'm sure many of you will recall that in December of 1991, Tim Berners-Lee released the World Wide Web. If you had been there, you might have noticed that almost nobody noticed, except for a couple of guys at the National Center for Supercomputer Applications, Mark Andreessen and Eric Bina, who said, wow, that's really cool, but it was a text-based thing. And they said, what if it had a graphical user interface? What if you could have imagery and formatted text and eventually, streaming audio and video? What if you could click on things and with a mouse and move from place to place in the connected web? So they developed something called Mosaic, which was a browser that had those graphical user interface properties. And they released that a couple of years later, around 1993, and it grabbed everyone's attention because the internet suddenly looked like a magazine, and that got everybody's attention. So it was downloaded repeatedly all over the place. Now, at that time, there were no classes you could take to be a webmaster, to create web pages. And so that meant you had to know how to essentially make HTML, by hand. Of course, over time, people created software that made it easier to produce the HTML that produces the web pages that we see and interact with. But the reason I bring this up is that all the browsers that were made had the property that you could ask to see the source code, the specific HTML that created a page that you thought was interesting. And you were free to take that HTML and copy it and to play with it and to make changes to it and explore what the possibilities were. So the webmasters taught each other. And it's kind of, in my view, that's sort of like the ultimate in open source, where everyone had the opportunity to learn from everyone else. There wasn't any intellectual property constraint or anything else. Ironically, this is true in the fashion industry, and I suppose those of you in Italy would be more sensitive to this than even I am. But my understanding is that very few fashion designs get patented or copyrighted or trademark is different. Trademark is lots of, that's important, but the actual fashions and everything tend not to get trademarked because they keep changing, which is of course in the interest of that industry. You don't want people to be stuck in one fashion, then they won't buy any more clothes. So you want that to keep changing, just like the taste in cars. So the thing I want to emphasize here is that the openness and the copying and the ability to learn from others created a whole genre of jobs and also new businesses that depended on the basic infrastructure of the World Wide Web sitting on top of the internet. Which brings me to another important point, and that's standards. And I can't overemphasize how important standards have been to creating a competitive environment. Now, some people will say standards are awful and they inhibit competition and blah, 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 and I don't buy that. I think that standards create interoperability, and interoperability creates the opportunity to both compete but also to build on top of. And so when the TCP/IP protocols were widely available and freely available, Tim Berners-Lee didn't have to get permission from us to go build the HTTP on top of it. He just put it out there and made it openly available the same way that Bob Kahn and I did the TCP/IP protocols for the same reason, which is to make it accessible so other people could take advantage of it. Now, the theme in all of this is enabling technology. It is enabling people to create and innovate because of what they shared. And here I think you have a very important and potent ingredient to open innovation. Now, open source has been mentioned more than once, and it was indeed an innovation because intellectual property applied to software had long been the normal practice. This is my software, you have to license it to use it, you have to pay me to use it, and open source sounded like it was counterintuitive. It is not counterintuitive, as we have seen, but there are some problems here, and I want to make sure that the audience is aware of what those problems are with regard to open source. Open source is provided in the form of libraries full of software. You can go to GitHub or some of the other similar places in order to get the software. And it is thought incorrectly that because it's open source, most of the bugs have been worked out because everybody can see the source code and they can find the bugs and fix them. Unfortunately, this is one of those examples where if everybody is in charge, nobody's in charge. And the result is that everybody thinks everyone else has found all the bugs. And so a lot of people just take the open source software and throw it into operation, get it out into the field, and only then do they discover, well, there's still some bugs in there. So that says that we should think twice about using open source. It's not that there's anything wrong with it. It's just that, well, there may be something wrong with it, and we should pay attention to that. So I would say be cautious about the use of open source. Make sure you know what you're doing. Make sure you check to see whether or not, in fact, it is reliable. Now, because no software has no bugs, as far as I'm aware, and this is a result of 80 years of programming, not me personally, but our community, we haven't figured out how to avoid bugs in software. The consequence of that is that when there are bugs in software that people are relying on, which is especially true in this highly distributed environment now, we need to have a way of fixing the bugs. And the implication of that, from my point of view anyway, is that the device that's receiving a new software upload has to make sure that A, it came from a legitimate source, and B, that it hasn't been altered on its way from source to destination, because you don't want to download a piece of malware. So how do you do that? And the answer typically is digital signatures and encrypted hash and things of that sort in order to be assured that the data is coming from a valid source. When people make products that are software-based and are networked, one of the questions that a customer should be asking always is, how long are you going to support the software for this device? And if this is one of those things that it goes into the house and it's heating, ventilation, and air conditioning is supposed to last for 10, 15, 20 years, I think, and it involves any software, you want some reassurance that it will be maintained. And if for some reason you worry that it might not be maintained because the company goes out of business or it declares that it doesn't want to do that, then you want to be sure that there is some sort of a source code escrow arrangement that you can demand access to the source code in order to maintain the equipment that's reliant upon it. The other point I want to make about the risk factors associated with open source or with software in general, not just open source, is that because there are bugs, potential bugs, we are at risk of malware exploiting those bugs. And so once again, this wonderful enabling character of software, this endless frontier, you can do anything you can figure out how to program is sort of fair game in this software space. But we have to be thoughtful about the fact that this means some people can exploit the mistakes that have gotten out there into products and services that we are relying on. This causes me to generally be worried about and ask many questions about the consequences of the software not working as expected, which suggests things like backup alternative ways of getting business done. I mean, one of the most horrible things that can happen to you if you're a heavy traveler like I used to be before the pandemic is to hear that the computers are down when you're at the airport, because you know what that means. It means long lines and missed flights and a whole bunch of other bad stuff like luggage disappearing or never getting to where it's supposed to go, or worse, going where it wasn't supposed to go. So the computers are down is not a good thing to hear, and yet it is a risk factor associated with networked software. So let me now try to summarize where I think I have ended up myself in thinking about all of this. The first thing is that sharing has turned out to be one of the most powerful enabling tools we have, whether it's sharing software or sharing data. And when you think about scientific progress, when you think about the exchange of scientific experimental data, for example, you can see how quickly that can accelerate the pace of progress. So let me give you a small anecdote about that from my early days with working with the Defense Department, the Defense Advanced Research Projects Agency. In 1968 or so, DARPA said that they were going to build a network of computers linking about a dozen research centers and universities together who were being paid to do research in artificial intelligence and computer science. And DARPA said, the reason that we're building the network is that we can't buy new computers for everyone every year. So we want you to share all those computing resources, and we want you to share your software and the research results that you've got. And by the way, we will fund everybody. We will fund everybody. So don't hide your information because you thought it would give you an edge in the next bid for the next year's research funding. Share it with everybody because we want to advance the state of the art as quickly as we can. This was a brilliant move on their part. The ARPANET succeeded in overcoming the challenge of getting heterogeneous machines and operating systems to interwork with each other over a homogeneous network. And Bob Kahn and I took that one step further and said, can we do this with multiple networks? Can we do it with radio and satellite and eventually Ethernet, as well as dedicated wireline networks? And that too has succeeded very well. But the openness, not only of the architecture and the protocols, but also the institutions that grew around it, like the Internet Engineering Task Force, is equally important in the internet story anyway. There isn't any way to join the IETF. All you can do is show up and contribute. And, if your ideas are attractive, people will pick them up. And if they're not, they won't. And that's it. There's no forcing function there. But the openness is vital to the rate at which progress is made. And so I think we still have a long ways to go with regard to sharing of data to enable the progress that's possible. For example, we need standards for describing the data, the metadata. We need to understand the formats and standardize them so that when we get scientific information, we can figure out what to do with it. This problem comes up all the time because people generate data from experiments, but they don't necessarily have common ways of describing what that information is. When we publish papers, for example, it's often the case that the data and the analytic software that went with it doesn't get published or isn't necessarily available, and yet that would advance the state of the art dramatically. So I suspect that sharing of scientific information has some ways to go now beyond the traditional publishing of papers to get to the point where we actually share software and data as well. So I'm going to stop there because I've consumed more than the time that I think I was allotted, but I want to thank you for allowing me to be part of the conversation and also to pick the brains of Michele, Fabrizio, and the others who are to come. So Giovanni, back to you.
Yeah, thank you, Vint. You're perfectly on time. You have not exceeded at all your slot. That's perfect and also very, very interesting. So now we can open up questions. I have a question here on the chat from Rodney, and it's directed to Fabrizio. So he was struck by your comment about the non-competition clause and the non-existence of that in the Silicon Valley. It's not in Italy, but in the Silicon Valley. So the question is, actually goes to the heart of the open innovation process. How do you protect intellectual property if you have no such clause? Because I guess Rodney is wondering, the company still needs some form of property.
Yeah, it's a question I get asked quite often, in particular in Italy. I mean, I have kids that send me business plan saying with a non-disclosure agreement attached to it, and the people that really don't want to talk about their idea because they think they have such a great idea and they don't want to share with anybody and want to keep it as close as possible. And I always say this: that is, look, if there are not other 3 people in Silicon Valley doing exactly what you have in mind, it is a really bad idea. So if it's a good idea, there must be other people doing it. So so don't worry about it. You got to share your idea. It's just not, the idea is not that important. It's how you execute on it, how you make it happen. So it is similar to IP. I mean, I come from open source, so I have 3 patents with my name on it, and it's always for with the idea that you need to defend yourself in case somebody attacks you. It's not really to attack someone. And someone in Italy, I've heard so many people say, oh, I'm going to have a patent and then I'm going to sue Google. Yeah, go ahead and sue Google. It's going to cost you $10 million. And then
Wait a minute. I'm sorry, Fabrizio, but please don't tell people to sue Google. Enough people do that already. Help with that.
Because they're gonna lose anyway. So I don't know if you want to add anything, but that's my gist is that I don't worry too much about ideas and protecting the ideas that much. I don't believe in that being a factor. I don't think Facebook is built on, I don't know how many patents they have, or Instagram or Snapchat or all those. I think they all copied each other quite a bit, and it's not the idea. It's how you execute on it.
So I wonder if I could jump in
Yes.
to add a little color.
Yes,
First of all,
absolutely.
there are such things as non-disclosure agreements, and they are enforceable. And so that is.
But no VC will ever read a business plan if you send them with an NDA.
Actually, the way I do this is to send me your business plan without any proprietary information in it. If it's convincing enough, then I'll sign an NDA to see the details. And that's at least how I've dealt with that. So there are NDAs. The other thing, which is important to know, is that the reason that you can't stop somebody from going to work for a competitor is that California is what's called a right to work state, which you have the right to work. People can't stop you from doing that. However, non-disclosures can persist. And when you are hired into a company that has a substantial amount of intellectual or not intellectual property in the patent sense, because those are public, but what do you call it? Trade secrets. You can argue that certain trade secrets should be protected, and you can ask people to sign non-disclosures. If you discover that they have disclosed in violation to that agreement, that is actionable. I actually agree with you, generally speaking, though. I mean, the way Silicon Valley works is you just run like hell, because Fabrizio's point is that there are 3 guys in some, college dorm who are already pursuing that same idea. And that's what keeps Google running like crazy, because we think there might be a Larry Page and a Sergey Brin in some, dorm room at Stanford who just figured out a better idea than we have. So, run like hell.
Okay, thank you very much. Michele, what do you think about not only Emilia-Romagna, which is a particular place in Italy, which is actually very fast, but the overall network industrial texture in Italy and in Europe? Are we doing the right things in order to speed up the evolution, or do you still see a lot of bureaucracy? And what is your feel about that?
The feeling is that we have a lot of bureaucracy, and but before the bureaucracy is cultural thinking. So we are lucky because here in Bologna, Modena, Ferrari, our territory is super powerful. We have the Motor Valley, the packaging, the automation, food. So we have about 20 at least sectors, right? We have only here in the manufacturing, in the industry side, more than 3,000 industries. But most of the times, because of IPs issues and others, the people tend to stay inside their walls, inside the company, inside the industry. So this is a cultural thing that probably the next generation, the new generation, like our generation, is, let's say, changing this. That's why, for example, the great project we have in Bologna, the competence center of BREX that we have in Bologna, that is really giving the opportunity to the industry that normally are more following a mother company or their own customer or the leader of their value chain. They have the opportunity to test new technologies like 3D printing, additive manufacturing, new big data, of course, because the competence center is based on the big data technologies. That is a great idea where university students and companies, they can collaborate together on projects. And this is actually working, is actually functioning. We have great others kind of, let's say, examples in Europe, in Germany, for example, also thinking to the Fraunhofer framework programs, and also in the UK, there are some very exciting stories about competence centers that were capable to create a very, let's say, high-tech environment and attracting larger groups also from the outside. We have the great opportunity in the past 3-4 years, Philip Morris, big billion investment in Bologna, the VW Group, big investment in Bologna with Lamborghini. So we are capable to attract, and we have to do much more in order to be capable to attract these large groups to invest here in the region. Because in the region we have everything about mechanics, automation, now also in the data. So we are very well structured, but we have to create more system between also different companies together, and starting to work on let's say applications that are that make the difference. And today there are a lot of opportunities, because especially for the SME, when they are flexible, when they have the right technologies, when they have the right mindset, they can probably gain new market shares compared to much bigger companies that are the leader in of that market, for example. So we have great opportunities. We have to do let's say more, and this is something that, of course, let's say we don't have to wait for what's happening in Rome. So we have to act, and we have to try to do things or thinking out of the box.
Okay, so we don't do like the Romans do,
No.
essentially. Yeah. Okay, Vint, you have your microphone is closed right now, but I want to ask you a question. So if you can open your microphone.
There you go.
You've been talking about tracking the authenticity of data, and we've been talking about blockchain for many years now. And I wonder if that is coming of age really now. Is that workable? Is that a good solution? Is it sustainable from the energy consumption point of view? What is your position on the blockchain?
Well, okay, first of all, let us not conflate Bitcoin with blockchain.
Yeah, sure.
They're not the same. And the Bitcoin situation and the decision about who will sign the next block and earn the next Bitcoin does not necessarily dictate how blockchains can work. So I'm honestly not a big fan of Bitcoin for many reasons, not the least of which I don't think is it bound to a particular value. It has a lot of fluctuation. The blockchain concept is attractive, but it has some limitations. One of them is that scaling may turn out to be a challenge. If there's a very high transaction rate and you have to keep signing blocks at some high speed, depending on how the signer is selected, this may or may not work very well. I'm not a big fan of the anonymous blockchain. I don't believe that the anonymity really gives you any increased safety or security. And for myself anyway, if I'm going to use blockchain or rely on it, I would like to know who are the parties I am relying on to run the blockchain, in which case that's sometimes called a permissioned blockchain, which gives you better insight into who you're relying on. The third point to be made about blockchain is that you can achieve its objectives in a number of other ways. A distributed database with digital signatures for validation is not a bad alternative for that. And finally, I think I want to point out that if you enter something into a blockchain, there's no guarantee that what you entered is true or accurate or correct. It's just unchangeable. And there's a date and time and a hash so that it can't be modified by somebody, at least not without a considerable amount of computation. But it doesn't necessarily mean that the information is true. And so we run into the potential hazard that somebody will put false information into a blockchain, a claim of one kind or another. So the fact that it's in a blockchain does not necessarily solve all the problems that you might run into. Last point, looking at cryptocurrencies for a moment, even if the blockchain is well implemented and it's permissioned and you know who's involved and you have belief that the software has been well implemented, the coins that are associated with the cryptocurrency are typically implemented in a wallet of some kind. The wallet is not part of the blockchain. And the consequence is that if the wallet has bad software and is breakable, then you may lose your cryptocurrency even though the blockchain part was working okay. And we've heard many stories about blockchain coins or Bitcoins being lost because somebody attacked the place where they were stored as opposed to the place that was enabling the transaction. So my answer is that it's not the solution to everything, and it might not even be the solution to a great many things. But on the other side, in the appropriate scale, it can be useful. We use it at Google for certificate transparency, for example, which is an application where when you put in a change to the domain name system or you update certificate, it goes into a blockchain so that people can go look back to see what the history of that particular certificate is and who signed it and so on. So for that, the transaction rate's fairly modest, in which case the blockchain works perfectly well. So I would say if you're going to use blockchain, don't be oversold by the hype. Think very carefully about what it is you're trying to do and whether blockchain turns out to be a good solution to the problem.
Okay, thank you very much. Very clear. We have 3 questions from the chat on the YouTube channel, one for each of you. So I will start with Fabrizio. Andrea Catabriga is asking you, in your opinion, if the open source hardware idea can also take up as the open source software idea did, or why hasn't it happened in the same way with open source hardware instead of open source software? What is your opinion on that?
So I'm a software engineer, so that limits my capability of answering the question. I think it whatever Arduino is doing sounds to me very close to open source hardware. Maybe I'm far, but it makes sense in that space as well. But it's not something I know very well, so I can't really.
So we can transfer this to Michele because he is working with hardware and open source hardware. Is this something that makes sense to you, Michele?
What we are doing in Poggipolini is working now on a platform. So we call this platform a phygital platform, where we are not only creating a digital twin of all the processes we described before, but it's a way of getting all the connectivity out of different machines and to control and to manage all of them on top. So having a backbone on top of all of the systems. That could be an idea, and it could be an idea that gives you the opportunity in the future to be not, let's say, dependent of a brand of a machine tool that, for example, you are using. Because in the end, in the manufacturing environment, let's say the know-how is how do you develop and how you control and how you program the machine. So programming is the know-how. So that is the tricky part for the machine tool, let's say, makers.
Okay.
So, Giovanni, there's one other example of what I think is open source hardware, and that was the IBM PC. Because once that was made known what the architecture was, lots of people replicated that. It created an enormous enabling space for people to develop software. And that, I think, is another example of how openness can create new opportunity.
Right, and we could buy different parts from different vendors and put them in and assemble our own PC. That was a fun time. We remember that. Yes, now machines are a little more difficult to deal with because of miniaturization. Andrea Tognolo is asking you, Michele, how did you find the companies to work with you for this open innovation project? How did you open to other companies? Is it the B-Rex or other environments? What did you use?
No, I started many years ago, so B-Rex is relatively new, it was a couple of years ago. I was able, and that was probably, I was lucky because a lot of my colleagues probably didn't have the opportunity to have also the time to travel and to connect with people, to be part of networks, and to be curious and to take a flight and go and talk with others in competence center and so on. So I was capable to connect with other people. We did, for example, a great programs a couple of years ago with the University of Bologna, the Sugar program that started, the design thinking program that started in Stanford. And in that case, for example, we were capable to give to the students in Bologna, and then we selected another university in Japan, in Kyoto University, a challenge, and that challenge was based off the new startup, and we were capable to connect with new minds, with new talents that are today almost some of them part of the program. But the point is to be open and to try always to save some time during your day to try to go and check and connect and listen and meet other people. So the Sensing startup started 5 years ago because I was capable to find this engineer that left after 30 years. He was in charge of the R&D of a sensoristic, very important company. He left, he started up his startup. It was in this event, we talked, and after a couple of weeks, we were capable to work on this idea. So that was really working on a startup, and then yeah, try to connect as much as you can.
Okay, thank you very much. So Fabrizio, back to you. I have a question from Mika. I'm not sure I understand completely the question, so I will just read it to you. With the new normal on favorable conditions for open innovation, okay, could you imagine pursuing intercloud with respect to internet that seems to have faded away since 2010? I don't know if you're familiar with this idea of intercloud.
I'll pass it to Vint because he seems to know the answer.
Okay, let's go to Vint.
Oh, okay. Yeah, absolutely wrong. Intercloud is real and it is being pursued, especially by the cloud makers, you know, at Microsoft and Google and AWS. At Google, we adopted something called Anthos, which is intended to allow containers to move among the clouds so that you could run those containers theoretically on any cloud.
So what is the definition of intercloud? How do you define that?
Well, intercloud is the ability to allow information to flow from cloud to cloud for software to run on more than one cloud. It's not too different than internet in some sense, because internet allowed arbitrary selections of heterogeneous computers to communicate and exchange information with each other. And the intercloud is intended to allow a similar kind of capability. This means that the customers don't have to be locked into any particular brand of cloud within certain constraints. Now, the reason that there are constraints is that some clouds will have special purpose capability that others might not have. We have TensorFlow processing hardware, which we think is unique to the Google system. But there are other kinds of processing capabilities in competing clouds that might be special to them. So ideally, a customer could move computations from one cloud to another, depending on what the special capabilities are, or at least have the freedom to move what we'll call a kind of vanilla container capabilities in order to deal with the possibility that, you know, the service that they were relying on isn't available right now, or maybe they decided that the contractual arrangements are not satisfactory and they want to move someplace else. You don't want to have to literally reprogram everything because you move to another cloud. So intercloud ideas, in my view, are important, and I think they're becoming important to customers in particular who are increasingly dependent on cloud-based services.
Okay, great. So we're getting closer to the end of our time. We have 3 more minutes, and I want to get into politics now, not the elections on November 3rd, not that far, but a little bit of regulation. So all we've talked about so far goes beyond the boundaries of nations, and but for sure in Europe there is a concern about, for example, privacy, and but also taxes on services and so on. So what is, in your opinion, and I'm asking you this to Fabrizio and Vint in particular, what is your opinion on the role of regulation, international regulation? Are you against that in a sense, or do you think there is something that is useful? What is your opinion?
Well, I moved to Silicon Valley because I really like the idea of the government not being in the middle of everything I was going to do. So just what we want here is just you know, stay out of the way. I mean, if as much as possible. I don't need the government, and you know, I don't need the government to do something for me to be successful. You know, if they don't do anything to stop me, that'll be great. So, and that, you know, gets you to a certain point, and then, you know, is the concept of break things and be fast. And at a certain point, though, you need to have some regulation, and you know, I think we got to a certain point where privacy is becoming really important, and you know, things that we were doing at the beginning that accelerated a lot of innovation got too far. And you know, this idea that, you know, we're just putting it, you know, a website and other people are putting the content, so it's not us. I think they're not. We're getting to, there are enough examples why this doesn't work, and some regulation is necessary. I'm not a fan of regulation in general. I'm not a fan of government getting into things, because they usually put red tape on everything. Maybe because I grew up in Italy and it was hard to start a company, and you need a notary public. I came here and I got money through PDFs, and I signed PDFs, and all of a sudden I got $5 million online. There were things, I never went to a notary public. I don't even know what that is. So there are things that allowed California and Silicon Valley to move fast because there was no regulation. I think we're getting to a point where a little bit is necessary. In my opinion, it shouldn't go too far, and Europe tends to go sometimes a bit too far, and that kind of grinds everything to a halt. And then you have some other parts of the world where they have they do whatever they want, where it gets even harder to compete because they are free to do whatever they want. And I think you need to kind of strike a balance.
So Vint, what is the right amount of regulation for you?
Well, I don't know that I have a good metric, but I think Fabrizio's points are well taken. Regulation happens for a reason. Sometimes it's because the state wants to protect itself. China is an example. The regime wants to protect itself. In the US, I think that we're seeing an increased amount of attention to regulation, partly because of what Europe has done with GDPR, an increased sensitivity to privacy. There's also an increased awareness of hazards of social networking. And so we're seeing the Section 230 part of the Communications Code being re-examined because it is believed by some that there are harmful effects of the online media, social media, that ought to be managed somehow. This is misinformation, disinformation, bullying, and a whole array of other kinds of harmful behaviors. And the state wants to protect its citizens. And one way to do that is to try to apply regulation. The problem here is that the methods by which these desirable effects are achieved may vary, and some choices may not be very effective. For example, somebody who says, well, machine learning will solve all the problem, I think is being overly optimistic. And I honestly believe that it's not just technology and regulation that will deal with some of these hazardous situations. Some of it's wetware up here in critical thinking, where we have to rely on people to use their heads. I mean, God gave them brains. They should use them to deal with misinformation and disinformation. So I believe that we are entering a period, though, where we're seeing that these technologies have potentially harmful social and economic effects, and we need to find a way to mitigate that. Regulation is one pass at it. Some of it will be self-regulation. Some of it will be individual regulation about behaviors. So I think that we're going to be faced with some kinds of management in order to limit harms, but we're still finding our way forward as to what's the best way to do that.
Okay, great. So our time is up. I would like to ask everyone that is still in their call to open up your microphones and join me in giving a big round of applause to our speakers, to the panel, for doing a great job. Very, very interesting evening.
Complimenti, è molto interessante, bravi.
So thank you.
Grazie a voi.
Thank you very much. Have a nice evening, everyone. Everything has been recorded, so it will be available on the YouTube channel if you missed any part of that. So thanks again to Fabrizio, Michele, and Vint, and hope to see you again soon, at least online.
Bye-bye.
Thanks, Giovanni.
Bye.
Bye-bye. Ciao.
Bye.
Good evening.
Good evening.